I'm an idiot. Not the cute rom-com kind either. More like the kind of woman who should come with a warning label and a laminated "Do not let her overthink unsupervised" sign. Let me tell you how I turned one simple romantic surprise into a full-blown investigation of my own marriage, and somehow ended up grateful it happened. My name is Linda Karishma. I'm 32, and last Tuesday I decided to surprise my husband Ethan at his office. Ethan is the CEO of a media company called Horizon Digital. Glass walls, corner office, the kind of building that smells like money and cold espresso. We've been married 5 years, and I thought it would be sweet to show up with his favorite pastries from that absurd French bakery downtown. The one where a small box costs more than my first car payment. Simple plan. Bring treats, steal a kiss, maybe convince him to take lunch with me for once. I walked into the lobby feeling almost proud of myself, clutching the fancy box like it was proof I still knew how to be spontaneous. Everything inside Horizon was sleek and shiny. People moved fast, like they were competing in some invisible Olympics. I was heading toward the elevators, already picturing Ethan's surprised smile, when a security guard stepped in front of me. He was huge, the kind of man who looked like he bench-pressed furniture for fun. His uniform was so crisp, it could have cut paper. "Can't let you through, ma'am. Authorized personnel only." I gave him my best polite smile. "No worries, I'm actually the CEO's wife. I'm just dropping something off." The guard didn't even hesitate. "Ma'am," he said, with the patient tone you use on a child insisting they're a dragon, "I see the CEO's wife every single day, and that's definitely not you." My stomach went cold. I blinked once, twice, like the words might rearrange themselves into something less insane. "I'm sorry, what?" He nodded toward the glass doors behind me, almost pleased with himself. "She comes in every morning, super nice, always carries his briefcase. In fact," he glanced at his watch, "she should be coming through right about now." And then the doors whooshed open. Ethan walked out. My husband, my whole life, looking sharp in that charcoal suit I'd ironed for him last weekend. He wasn't alone. Beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost brushed, was a woman, tall, polished, perfume commercial gorgeous, carrying his bag like it belonged in her hand. They were laughing. Ethan didn't even look my way. And the guard, standing right next to me, said the words that made the floor tilt under my feet. "See, that's her, Mrs. Thompson." My fingers tightened around the pastry box so hard the cardboard creaked. Because I wasn't watching my husband walk through that lobby with a coworker. I was watching him walk through with a woman everyone believed was his wife. And I had no idea who I was anymore in my own marriage. If you'd asked me the week before, I would have told you my marriage was solid. Not perfect, nothing real ever is, but steady in the way a familiar song is steady. You don't notice the rhythm until it stops. I'm Linda Karishma, 32, and I work remotely in IT support and systems maintenance for a mid-sized firm that's allergic to replacing printers before they start smoking. It's not glamorous, but it's stable, and I'm good at it. I'm the woman people call when something breaks and they don't want to admit they broke it. Ethan, on the other hand, lives in a world where people don't say printer jam. They say operational inefficiency. He's the kind of man who can walk into a room full of investors and make them feel like it was their idea to hand him money. We met 5.5 years ago at a fundraiser, one of those events where everyone pretends tiny food is normal food. I was there because my company sponsored a table, and my boss had begged me to attend because I seemed approachable. Translation: I was the only one who wouldn't terrify donors. Ethan was there because he was already climbing fast. Charming, polished, the kind of man people instinctively wanted to stand near. We bumped into each other near the bar, and yes, I spilled wine, right onto a woman's white dress. I still remember the flash of red spreading like a blooming stain, her face freezing in that shocked, silent rage. My lungs locked, my brain turned to static. And then I did the most ridiculous thing imaginable. I started explaining carbonation science while trying to dab the stain with club soda, like I was conducting an emergency lab experiment. Ethan watched me for a second, then laughed, not at me, but like he recognized something in my panic. He stepped in, apologized to the woman with the kind of smooth sincerity that calmed her down, then turned to me and said, "You know, you're either the bravest woman here or the most doomed." "Both," I whispered. That was our beginning. His ease next to my awkwardness. His world with its glass offices and sharp suits, and mine with its messy hair, late-night troubleshooting, and occasionally forgetting what kind of milk I even buy. We dated for a year before he proposed. He was nervous, actually nervous, and it surprised me. He took me to a small rooftop restaurant, the kind with string lights and wind that makes you feel like you're in a movie. When he slid the ring across the table, his hands shook slightly. I remember thinking, oh, he's real. Under all of that, he's real. Marriage wasn't a grand romance every day. It was small things. Ethan coming home late, loosening his tie, collapsing onto the couch and letting his face finally soften. Me packing his lunch when I was up early. Him learning to tolerate my terrible jokes because they made me laugh first. But there were always little seams. He worked late, often. Not suspiciously late, just constantly. Meetings stacked like dominoes, calls during dinner, weekends that weren't really weekends. Sometimes he'd say, "I'll be home early," and then I'd watch the sky darken from our kitchen window until I was reheating leftovers alone. And I told myself that was just marriage to an ambitious man. I told myself love was flexible. It stretched. His company, Horizon Digital, grew fast. New hires, new divisions, new leadership. Ethan became CEO 2 years ago, and after that, everything accelerated. It wasn't that he stopped loving me. It was that his world got louder, and mine got quieter inside it. I'd met his colleagues at parties, holiday events, quarterly celebrations, faces blurred together, marketing directors, finance leads, creative heads, people who spoke in sharp, confident sentences, people who looked like they belonged in Horizon's glass halls. I liked them fine. They liked me in a polite way, but I never felt rooted there. And there was one more thing, a small detail. So small, I ignored it for months. Ethan sometimes mentioned Danielle Thompson, his COO, like the name was part of his daily breath. "Danielle thinks we should push the campaign earlier." Danielle handled the investors perfectly. Danielle saved the meeting. It never bothered me. Not at first. Because why would it? I trusted my husband. I trusted my marriage. And until last Tuesday in that lobby, I didn't realize how fragile trust feels once a stranger tells you you've been replaced. After the lobby incident, I didn't go home right away. I stood outside Horizon Digital, the glass reflecting my own face back at me, too pale, too still, like I was watching someone else's life glitch in real time. I told myself there was an explanation. There had to be. People don't just replace wives. Not quietly. Not with smiles and briefcases and shared laughter at 8:45 in the morning. But once a thought like that slips into your mind, it doesn't leave politely. It settles in, rearranges the furniture, starts opening drawers you didn't even know existed. Over the next few days, everything felt off. Not dramatically, not in a way that would justify confrontation, just enough to make me notice things I'd previously smoothed over. Ethan started dressing sharper, even on days without meetings. New suits, different cologne, subtle changes, but they added up. When I commented, he smiled and said, "Danielle recommended a tailor." Danielle again. She'd always been part of Ethan's professional vocabulary, but now her name came up in casual moments too. Over dinner, while brushing his teeth. Once, when Ethan laughed at his phone, I asked what was funny. "Danielle sent a meme," he said. "What kind?" "Work stuff." That answer shouldn't have bothered me. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't an answer either. Then there were the dinners. "Client meeting," Ethan would say, already shrugging into his coat. "Board dinner. strategy session that ran long. Sometimes he came home smelling like wine and expensive restaurants. Sometimes he didn't come home until after midnight, slipping into bed quietly, pressing a soft kiss to my shoulder, like an apology he hoped would be enough. And I let it be enough, because I didn't want to be that wife, the suspicious one, the insecure one who couldn't handle ambition. I'd married a man with a big future. I told myself this was the cost. But little things kept slipping through the cracks. One evening, while folding laundry, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. A restaurant I knew well, romantic lighting, riverside view, the kind of place people save for anniversaries. "Client dinner?" I asked casually, holding it up. Ethan barely glanced at it. "Yeah, long one." "Just clients?" He paused, just for half a second, then nodded. "Of course." Another time, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. A name flashed on the screen. "Danielle." I didn't open it. I didn't even touch the phone, but I stared at it longer than I should have, my chest tightening around a feeling I couldn't yet name. It wasn't jealousy. It was displacement. Like I was slowly being edged out of a room I didn't realize had a seating chart. The worst part wasn't Ethan. It was everyone else. At a company mixer, one of his colleagues smiled warmly at me and said, "Oh, you must be his sister." I laughed it off. Wife, actually. Her face went blank for half a second too long. "Oh, right. Of course." Another time someone joked, "You must love sharing him with the company." I smiled, because that's what you do when you don't know whether you're being warned or teased. At night, lying beside Ethan, I replayed the lobby scene like a scratched record. The guard's certainty. The way he said he saw her every day. The way Ethan hadn't even glanced my way. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. If I'm his wife, why did I feel invisible? I didn't accuse. I didn't snoop. I didn't confront. I watched. I listened. And somewhere between the polite smiles, the late nights, and the way Ethan's world seemed to run just fine without me in it, something inside me shifted. Not into anger, into alertness, because love doesn't vanish all at once. It erodes. And I had just noticed the first crack. The moment everything broke wasn't loud. It wasn't a screaming match or a slammed door or a dramatic confession delivered under bad lighting. It was quiet, ordinary, and that somehow made it worse. 3 days after the lobby incident, Ethan texted me at 11:18 a.m. "Running late tonight, strategy dinner, don't wait up." No heart emoji. No explanation beyond that. Just information. Efficient, stripped of softness. I stared at the message longer than I needed to, my thumb hovering over the screen. I almost replied with something light. "Okay, love you." Almost. Instead, I typed, erased, and finally sent. "Where?" The reply came a minute later. "Riverhouse." My stomach dropped. Riverhouse wasn't just a restaurant. It was the restaurant. Candlelight, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water, waiters who spoke about food like they were describing art. It was where Ethan had taken me the night he told me Horizon was finally profitable, where he'd kissed my hand across the table and said, "I couldn't have done this without you." We hadn't been back since. I told myself I was overreacting. Businesses used nice restaurants. CEOs entertained clients. None of that meant anything on its own. But my hands were already shaking. I didn't plan it, not consciously. I didn't say, "I'm going to catch my husband doing something wrong." I just put on my coat. The city air felt sharper than usual as I ordered a rideshare. The driver was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a dashboard crowded with air fresheners. "Where to?" he asked. "Riverhouse," I said, and heard the edge in my own voice. He glanced at me in the mirror, but didn't comment. By the time we pulled up, my heart was beating so hard it felt like it was pressing against my ribs, asking to be let out. The valet stand glowed under warm lights. Couples laughed softly as they stepped inside. Everything about the place whispered celebration. I stayed across the street, half hidden behind the reflection of a darkened storefront window. At 6:47 p.m., a black BMW pulled up. I knew it instantly. I hated that I knew. Ethan got out first. And then she did. The woman from the lobby. Tall, effortless. The kind of confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. She handed the keys to the valet without even looking at the ticket, like this was routine. Ethan smiled at her. Not a polite smile, not a professional one. The real one. The one that used to be just for me. They stood close while waiting for the valet stub. Close enough that her arm brushed his. Close enough that it didn't look accidental. She said something. I couldn't hear it. But Ethan laughed, head tipping back slightly, the sound carrying even across the street. My vision tunneled. Breathe, Linda. Just breathe. They walked inside together. I followed. The hostess smiled warmly. Table for two? Yes, Ethan said easily. Reservation under Thompson. That name hit me like a physical blow. Thompson. The same name the guard had used. The same certainty. I didn't wait for them to be seated. I slipped into a corner near the bar, my back to the wall, my hands wrapped around a glass of water I didn't remember ordering. From where I sat, I had a clear view. Corner table, candle, water already poured. Familiarity in every movement. They didn't look like coworkers having a tense business dinner. They looked comfortable. Intimate in that quiet way that doesn't need touching to feel close. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the table, listening to her like nothing else existed. She spoke with her hands, animated, confident. When she smiled, he watched her mouth, not her eyes. I felt something tear, not sharply, but slowly, like fabric giving way. The waiter brought wine, red. Ethan nodded approval without even asking her preference. She took a sip, eyes closing briefly, pleased. They talked, laughed, shared glances that lingered just a second too long. And then it happened. She reached across the table and adjusted his tie. Casual, practiced, intimate. My breath left my body in a rush I couldn't control. That wasn't professional. That wasn't necessary. That was familiar. My fingers moved before my brain could stop them. My phone was in my hand, camera open, recording. Proof, because some part of me already knew I'd need it, even if I didn't yet understand why. I filmed as she laughed again, as Ethan leaned closer, as the distance between them kept shrinking until it barely existed at all. At one point, she reached over, speared a piece of food with her fork, and held it out to him. Ethan didn't hesitate. He leaned in and took the bite. I felt dizzy. That was it. That was the moment my denial shattered completely. Not because of the act itself, but because of how natural it was, how unremarkable, like something they'd done before, like something they'd do again. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping softly against the floor. The sound was swallowed by the restaurant's hum. No one noticed. Not even Ethan. I walked out into the night, my legs numb, my chest tight, my phone heavy in my hand, like evidence I wasn't ready to look at. Outside, the river reflected the lights of the city. Beautiful, indifferent. I stood there shaking, the taste of betrayal sharp on my tongue, and realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about another woman. This was about the life I thought I had, and I had no idea how much of it was real anymore. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. The idea of walking into our apartment, our shared space, our shared silence, felt impossible while my chest was still vibrating with what I'd just seen. So I walked. No destination, just movement. Cold air scraping against my skin like it might sand something raw into clarity. I replayed the scene over and over, each detail sharpening instead of fading. The way Ethan leaned toward her without realizing it. The way she touched his tie like it belonged under her fingers. The ease, the practice. That was what hurt the most. Not the possibility of betrayal, but the realization that if it was happening, it wasn't new. By the time I finally made it home, it was after 10. The apartment was dark and quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. I set my keys down carefully, like noise itself might tip something over inside me. I sat on the couch and didn't move for a long time. My phone buzzed. Ethan. Dinner ran long, heading home soon. No apology, no explanation, just logistics. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to scream. I wanted to type everything I'd seen in one explosive paragraph and demand answers now. Instead, I typed, okay, one word, controlled, bloodless. I hated myself a little for it. He came home an hour later. I heard his key in the lock, the familiar rhythm of him slipping off his shoes, loosening his tie. He walked into the living room, smiling softly, like nothing in the world had shifted. Hey, he said. You're still up. I nodded. Couldn't sleep. He kissed my forehead, quick, absent-minded, and went to the kitchen. I watched him from the couch, noticing things I'd never cataloged before. How relaxed he looked. How unburdened. How was dinner? I asked. Productive, he said easily. Long. With who? My voice surprised me. Calm. Almost casual. He didn't look at me when he answered. Danielle. Some board members. That name again. I felt something inside me lock into place. I didn't confront him, not that night. I didn't pull out my phone and shove the footage in his face. I didn't accuse. I didn't cry. I lay beside him in bed later, staring at the ceiling, while his breathing evened out beside me. And I asked myself the question that scared me most. What if this is my fault? What if I'd let the distance grow too wide? What if I'd gotten too comfortable being the background support, the stable constant, while his world expanded and filled with people who spoke his language better than I ever could? I thought about all the times I'd waved him off to late meetings, all the nights I'd eaten dinner alone, telling myself ambition required sacrifice. Did I sacrifice too much? Around 3 a.m., I slipped out of bed and padded into the living room, my phone clenched in my hand. I watched the video I'd recorded. Once. Just once. It was worse on replay. The angles I'd missed. The way Ethan's posture changed around her. The intimacy that didn't need explanation. I turned the phone face down and pressed my palms into my eyes until I saw stars. This wasn't about catching him in a lie anymore. This was about deciding who I was going to be next. The woman who swallowed doubt and stayed silent? Or the woman who demanded clarity, even if it shattered something. By morning, my head ached from lack of sleep, but my resolve felt strangely solid. I packed my laptop bag, put on clothes that made me feel composed, capable. Ethan was already gone when I woke up fully. Another early meeting, another missed goodbye. I stood in the doorway of our apartment for a long moment before leaving, taking in the quiet like it might be temporary. I wasn't ready to confront him yet, but I was done pretending I hadn't seen what I saw. Whatever was happening, whatever truth waited underneath, I was going to face it. Not as a desperate wife, but as a woman who deserved honesty. The next few days unfolded like a slow burn. No explosions, no dramatic confessions, just pressure building under the surface until every breath felt heavier than the last. I started paying attention in ways I never had before. Not spying, not snooping, observing. Ethan's routines tightened. His mornings became more efficient, more precise. He left earlier, came home later. When he talked about work, his words sharpened, polished until there was nothing personal left in them. I noticed how often Danielle's name surfaced. Not dramatically, not defensively, but constantly. Like oxygen, like gravity. Danielle already handled that. Danielle agrees with the strategy. Danielle and I talked it through. Always Danielle and I. Never just I. One evening, Ethan's mother called. She loved calling at inconvenient moments, like she believed marriage was a shared hotline she still had access to. I hear Ethan's doing incredible things, she said warmly. Everyone's talking about how well he and Danielle work together. I hummed non-committally. They're practically inseparable, she continued. It's good he has someone who understands him so completely. Leadership like that needs balance. I stared at the wall while she spoke, my fingers curling tighter around my phone. Balance. The word lodged itself under my ribs. Another night, we attended a small company event. Casual drinks, nothing formal. I stood beside Ethan, my hand resting lightly on his arm. He smiled at me, but it felt performative, like muscle memory. Danielle arrived late. The shift in the room was immediate. Ethan's posture straightened. His attention snapped into focus. He moved toward Danielle instinctively, like a magnet pulled toward its pair. I watched them talk, heads close, voices low. They laughed. Ethan laughed in that easy way I hadn't heard directed at me in weeks. People gathered around them. Conversations orbited their energy. At one point, a woman from marketing leaned toward me and said, "You must be so proud. They really are a power pair." I swallowed. "I'm proud of my husband." She smiled awkwardly, like she'd misstepped. "Of course, I just meant professionally." I nodded, smiled. Inside, something cracked further open. Later, as we were leaving, Ethan lingered to finish a conversation. Danielle stepped away to take a call. I found myself standing beside her without planning to. "Long week?" I asked. Danielle glanced at me, polite but slightly distracted. "Always." "You and Ethan seem close," I said carefully. She smiled. "That's what happens when you build something under pressure. You rely on the person next to you." I searched her face for something, anything, that would confirm or deny the fear coiled inside me. "You two work late a lot," I said. "Yes," she replied simply. "It's necessary." That was it. No defensiveness, no discomfort, just certainty, which somehow made everything worse. At home that night, Ethan barely touched his dinner. "Are you okay?" I asked. He nodded automatically. "Just tired." "Tired from work or tired of us?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. He froze. The room went very still. "What does that mean?" he asked. I shrugged, forcing calm into my voice. "It means we don't talk anymore. It means you're always somewhere else, even when you're here." "That's not fair," he said, his tone tightening. "You know what this job requires." "I do," I said quietly, "but I don't know where I fit in it anymore." He exhaled sharply. "You're overthinking." That phrase, the one that always shut things down. I nodded, because pushing further would have turned it into a fight, and I wasn't ready for a fight yet. Instead, I opened my laptop later that night while Ethan slept. I didn't feel proud of what I was doing, but I felt compelled. I searched, carefully. Public information only. Company pages, press releases, social media posts tagged at events. Patterns emerged. Ethan and Danielle in almost every major photo together. Standing close, touching shoulders, laughing. Comments calling them a dream team, a perfect duo, a modern partnership. Someone even wrote, "Work spouse's goals." Work spouse. The phrase sat there, ugly and loaded. I closed the laptop and stared into the dark, my reflection faint in the screen. This wasn't about jealousy anymore. This was about erasure. About realizing that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being part of the story people told about my husband's life. And I didn't know if that was because I'd stepped back or because I'd been quietly pushed out. The pressure inside me finally reached a point where I could feel it behind my eyes, in my throat, in the tight line of my jaw. I knew then that silence was no longer an option. Something had to break. Either my fear or the truth. The breaking point didn't come with shouting. It came with quiet. A suffocating, hollow quiet that settled over our apartment like dust no one bothered to wipe away. It was a Thursday night. Rain pressed softly against the windows, blurring the city lights into streaks of color. Ethan texted again. "Late meeting, don't wait up." The same sentence, the same shape, different night. I didn't reply. I sat at the kitchen table long after my food went cold, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic below. Everything felt paused, like I was standing in the middle of a life that had already moved on without me. When Ethan finally came home, it was after midnight. He moved carefully, quietly, like someone entering a room where they already knew they were unwelcome. He loosened his tie, set his phone face down on the counter, and poured himself a glass of water. I didn't look at him. "Linda," he said softly, "you're still awake." "I live here," I replied. My voice surprised me, flat, empty. He stood there for a moment, like he wanted to say something else but couldn't find the right entry point. Then he went to shower. The water ran. And so I slid down against the cabinet and sat on the kitchen floor, my back pressed to the cold wood, my arms wrapped around myself like that might hold me together. My chest hurt in a way that wasn't sharp enough to scream about, just deep enough to exhaust me. This was the lowest point. Not anger, not jealousy. Lonely, the kind that exists even when someone you love is in the next room. I thought about the woman in the lobby, about the ease with which people accepted her place beside my husband, about how quickly I'd been dismissed, not with cruelty, but with certainty. I see her every day. I wondered how many other people believed the same thing. And then the question I'd been avoiding finally surfaced, fully formed and terrifying. If Ethan never cheated, but still chose a life where I barely existed, would that hurt less? The shower turned off. I stood quickly, wiped my face, and went to bed, turning my back to his side of the mattress. He slid in beside me later, careful not to touch, like physical distance might keep us from colliding emotionally. I stared into the dark and let the tears come silently, soaking into the pillow where he wouldn't feel them. I wasn't dramatic. I didn't throw things. I didn't pack a bag. I just lay there, grieving something that hadn't officially ended, but no longer felt alive. By morning, I felt hollowed out. Ethan left early again. No goodbye, no explanation. Just the click of the door closing behind him. I didn't cry after that. I cleaned every surface, every drawer. I folded laundry with surgical precision. I wiped down counters that were already clean. I organized things that didn't need organizing. Because when you can't control your marriage, you control the edges of your world. Around noon, I sat down at my desk and opened a blank document. I titled it Facts. I wrote down everything I knew, everything I'd seen, every unanswered question. Not accusations, observations. That was when it hit me. This wasn't about proving Ethan guilty. This was about reclaiming myself. I had been shrinking, softening my needs, rationalizing my loneliness, convincing myself that being patient meant being silent, and I couldn't do it anymore. If the truth hurt, I would survive it. If the truth destroyed us, then maybe we were already standing on ruins. I closed the document, stood up, and looked around our apartment. At the couch where we used to laugh, the kitchen where we danced while cooking, the bedroom where I now felt like a guest. This was the bottom, and I understood something with painful clarity. The only way out was through. The turning point didn't arrive with proof I'd hunted down. It arrived with a conversation I never planned to have. That afternoon, I went back to Horizon, not to confront Ethan, not to spy, but because something in me needed to stand on solid ground again. I needed to stop orbiting his life and step back into my own. Horizon was hosting a public career fair that day. Open access, no badges, no explanations required. I dressed carefully, not to impress anyone, but to remind myself who I was. Clean lines, neutral colors, hair pulled back the way I did when I needed to feel composed, not decorative. The lobby felt different in the daylight. Less intimidating, more human. A different security guard waved me through without a second glance. On the 5th floor, the space buzzed with conversation. Booths lined the room. Coffee stations, smiling recruiters rehearsing their enthusiasm. I grabbed a paper cup and drifted, until I saw the sign, Executive Operations. Behind the table stood a woman in her late 20s, glasses slightly crooked, name tag reading Jennifer. "Hi," she said brightly. "Interested in Horizon?" "Yes," I replied. "I'm curious about the leadership culture." Her face lit up. "Oh, it's incredible. Ethan is amazing, and Danielle, honestly, the two of them together are unstoppable." Together again. "They work very closely?" I asked. Jennifer laughed. "All the time. Morning meetings, late nights, client dinners, weekend planning sessions. They're practically inseparable." My chest tightened, but I stayed calm. "That must be intense," I said. "Oh, totally. But they balance each other. Danielle really understands Ethan in a way no one else does." No one else. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Honestly, I don't know how their partners handle it." I felt the words land, heavy and exact. "Partners," I echoed. Jennifer's smile faltered. Oh, sorry. I just meant professionally speaking. That was when I felt it. Not rage, not grief. Clarity. I finally understood what had been hurting me. It wasn't another woman. It was the fact that everyone, including Ethan, had allowed his primary partnership to shift somewhere else without ever acknowledging the cost. Linda? I turned. Ethan stood a few steps away, eyes wide with shock. What are you doing here? He asked. I didn't flinch. Learning. Jennifer looked between us, realization dawning. Oh, you're his wife, I said calmly. Silence stretched. Ethan gestured toward a nearby conference room. Can we talk? Inside the glass-walled room, the noise of the fair faded into a dull hum. I didn't wait for him to speak. I'm not here to accuse you, I said. I'm here because I need to understand where I stand in your life. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Linda, I never meant to make you feel secondary, I said softly. Replaceable. Invisible. He looked stunned. You're not. Then why does everyone else see someone else beside you? He opened his mouth, then closed it. I continued, my voice steady. You didn't cheat. I know that now. But you did something else. You built a world where I no longer had a role. His shoulders sagged. I didn't realize, he admitted. Danielle and I, running the company, it consumed everything. I thought you understood. I understood the work, I said. I didn't agree to disappear. That was the moment his expression changed. Not defensive, ashamed. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I never wanted you to feel like you didn't belong. I don't need to belong to your company, I replied. I need to belong in your life. He nodded slowly, like something inside him had finally realigned. Then I need to fix that, he said. Not with words, with choices. I studied his face, not looking for promises, but for awareness. For the first time in weeks, I felt my spine straighten, because regardless of what he did next, something inside me had shifted permanently. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't chasing clarity. I had claimed it. And for the first time since that day in the lobby, I knew this. Whatever happened next, I would not lose myself again. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, quiet, relentless, unavoidable. After that conversation at Horizon, Ethan didn't come home late. He came home early. Not dramatically, not with flowers or speeches, just present. He set his phone down on the counter instead of keeping it in his hand. He loosened his tie and stayed in the kitchen while I cooked, even when there was nothing for him to do. We ate together, not talking much, but not avoiding each other either. The real consequences didn't hit until the next week. Ethan made changes, and not the kind you announce, the kind you notice. He stopped attending late dinners unless they were unavoidable. Client meetings moved to conference rooms, not candlelit restaurants. Weekend planning sessions disappeared from his calendar. When colleagues called, he didn't answer automatically. He let some calls go to voicemail. People noticed. At Horizon, the shift was immediate. I heard about it not from Ethan, but from others. A woman from marketing messaged me on LinkedIn. Hope everything's okay. Ethan seems different lately. Different meant unavailable. Different meant boundaries. Different meant the dynamic people had grown comfortable with was no longer being fed. Danielle felt it most. Ethan told me about the conversation the night it happened. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't villainize anyone. Danielle asked if something was wrong, he said quietly. I told her the truth. And? I asked. She was surprised, Ethan admitted. She thought we were fine. She thought you understood. I felt a familiar sting, but it didn't own me this time. And you? I asked. I told her understanding doesn't mean agreeing, Ethan said, and that I'd let work take up space it didn't earn. Danielle didn't argue, but the distance settled in. Not hostility, just recalibration. At work events, people stopped grouping Ethan and Danielle as a unit. Meetings became more structured, less casual, more professional. The whispers changed, too. Not cruel, but curious. What happened? Did something shift at the top? Guess even power partnerships have limits. I watched it from the outside, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was reality correcting itself. At home, Ethan tried harder, but not desperately. He listened more than he spoke. When I talked about my day, he didn't half listen while scrolling through emails. He asked questions, remembered answers. One night while we were washing dishes together, he said something that stayed with me. I didn't realize how much I'd let other people define my priorities, he said, until I almost lost the one person who never tried to. I didn't respond right away because forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a process. There were awkward moments, hesitation, nights when old resentment bubbled up without warning. Times I wondered if the damage had already etched itself too deeply. But I also noticed something else. I wasn't shrinking anymore. I spoke when something bothered me. I didn't cushion my needs to make them easier to accept. I didn't apologize for wanting space in his life. And Ethan, whether out of guilt, growth, or genuine change, made room. The biggest fallout didn't land on Ethan. It landed on the illusion. The illusion that ambition excuses neglect. That success compensates for absence. That partnership at work can quietly replace partnership at home without cost. It can't. And when that illusion cracked, everything built on it had to adjust. One evening, weeks later, we attended another Horizon event together. Smaller, quieter. This time, no one mistook my place. No awkward introductions, no assumptions. I stood beside Ethan, not clinging, not fading, just there. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. When we left, walking side by side into the night air, Ethan reached for my hand. I let him. Not because everything was fixed, but because something was finally honest. And honesty, real honesty, has consequences. For everyone. Healing didn't look like fireworks. It looked like mornings. Like Ethan making coffee without checking his phone first. Like him sitting at the table while I talk through a problem at work, actually listening instead of nodding on autopilot. Like me realizing I no longer felt the urge to monitor, to measure, to quietly brace myself for disappointment. It looked like choice, made daily, not promised once. We didn't become a perfect couple overnight. We didn't pretend the fracture never happened. We talked about it, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes painfully, sometimes with long pauses where neither of us knew what to say next. But we stayed in the conversation, and I stayed myself. That was the real change. I stopped treating my needs like inconveniences. I stopped translating my feelings into something easier for others to digest. I stopped believing that love meant being endlessly accommodating, because love doesn't ask you to disappear. One evening, weeks later, we sat on our couch, no TV, no phones, just the low hum of the city outside. Ethan turned to me and said, "I'm glad you didn't explode." I smiled faintly. I came close. "I know," he said, "but you didn't. You chose clarity instead." I thought about that, about how easily this story could have gone another way. How close I'd come to either swallowing everything or burning it all down. How neither option would have honored who I actually am. What saved us wasn't surveillance. It wasn't proof. It wasn't even the absence of cheating. It was the moment I stopped asking, what was he doing? And started asking, who was I becoming? I became someone who spoke up before resentment calcified. Someone who understood that partnership needs tending, especially when ambition gets loud. Someone who learned that trust isn't blind, it's intentional. And maybe that's the lesson I didn't know I needed. Not every threat to a relationship comes from betrayal. Some come from neglect, wearing a very convincing disguise called success. If you're listening to this and something feels off, don't wait for a scandal to justify your voice. You don't need a villain to ask for presence. You don't need proof to ask for respect. And if you're the one chasing something big, remember this. No achievement is worth losing the person who loved you before the applause. As for me, I'm still married, still learning, still wearing my flaws openly, but I no longer feel invisible in my own life. And that, more than certainty, more than comfort, is what finally feels like home.